The boardroom fell silent. 23 pairs of eyes stared at me as I stood up from my usual seat in the corner, the seat reserved for assistants, for note-takers, for people who didn't matter. My boss Jason's face had gone pale, then red, then a peculiar shade of purple I'd never seen on a human being before. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his expensive fountain pen clattering onto the mahogany table. "What did you just say?" I smiled calmly, the same smile I'd worn for the past 11 months while he'd treated me like furniture. "I said you're fired, Jason. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out within the hour. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 6 months, to the day this all really started. I'd been working at Vision Tech Solutions for almost a year when Jason first made me cry in the supply closet. Not that he knew about the tears. I waited until he'd strutted away, chest puffed out like a rooster who'd just won a cockfight, before I let myself feel anything at all. It was a Tuesday morning, and I just presented what I thought was a solid proposal for streamlining our client onboarding process. I'd spent 3 weeks analyzing data, interviewing account managers, and building a prototype dashboard. The presentation took 12 minutes. Jason's dismissal took 12 seconds. "Maria honey," he'd said, leaning back in his chair with that patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. "This is adorable. Really. But we pay consultants 6 figures to handle strategic initiatives. Your job is to manage my calendar and keep my coffee hot. Why don't you focus on what you're actually qualified to do?" The 3 junior executives in the room had laughed. Not loudly, they were too smart for that, but I heard it. That soft chuckle that says she should have known better than to try. I'd nodded, gathered my materials, and walked out with my head high. Then I locked myself in the supply closet between the reams of printer paper and the extra toner cartridges and let exactly 3 tears fall before I wiped my face, fixed my makeup, and went back to my desk. What Jason didn't know, what nobody at Vision Tech knew except the lawyers who'd helped me structure everything, was that I wasn't just Maria Chen, executive assistant. I was Maria Chen, daughter of David Chen, the founder who'd built Vision Tech from a garage startup into a $50 million enterprise before a heart attack took him when I was 19. I was Maria Chen, who'd inherited 45% of the company's shares when Dad died, held in a trust that matured when I turned 28. I was Maria Chen, who'd spent the last 3 months quietly purchasing another 30% from retiring board members through a shell corporation, using the dividend payments I'd been banking for almost a decade. I was Maria Chen, who owned 75% of the company where Jason thought he was king. But he didn't need to know that yet. Because every insult, every dismissal, every time he took credit for someone else's work, I was building a case. Not a legal one, though my attorney assured me we had plenty of ammunition for that too. No, I was building something better. A complete record of exactly who Jason was when he thought nobody was watching. The next incident came 3 weeks later, during the quarterly board meeting. I was there to take minutes, sitting in my designated corner with my laptop and my invisible cloak of irrelevance. Jason was presenting the new AI integration project, my AI integration project. The one I'd outlined in a late-night email he'd asked me to send him for reference. Every slide, every insight, every carefully researched data point had come from my work. My nights. My expertise in machine learning that I'd developed during my computer science degree at Stanford. The degree I'd never mentioned because Jason had made it clear on my first day that he preferred assistants who knew their place. "As you can see," Jason said, laser pointer dancing across the projection screen, "this revolutionary approach will cut processing time by 40% and increase accuracy by 62%. I've been developing this framework for the past quarter." I kept typing notes, my face neutral. But my fingers might have hit the keys a little harder than necessary. Board member Richard Morrison nodded approvingly. "Impressive work, Jason. This could be game-changing for the industry." "Thank you, Richard. I think so too." Jason's smile was modest, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. "I'll have my team begin implementation next quarter." His team. My work. His credit. I saved the meeting minutes and emailed them to the distribution list without a word. That night, I met with my attorney, Patricia Wells, at a quiet restaurant 20 miles from the office. Patricia had been Dad's lawyer, and she'd helped me structure the trust to keep my ownership stake private. Now she was helping me plan something much more satisfying. "The timeline looks good," Patricia said, reviewing her notes over a glass of Merlot. "The stock purchases from the Morrison and Blackwell estates are finalizing next week. That puts you at 75% ownership, which gives you absolute control. And the employment documentation? Everything's filed and dated. The performance reviews you've been keeping, the emails where he claims your work as his own, the recordings from the meetings, it's all admissible and it's all damning. Patricia looked at me seriously. Maria, you could do this tomorrow. You could walk in there and fire him right now. Why wait? I swirled my own wine, watching the deep red liquid catch the candlelight. Because I want him to hang himself. Completely. Publicly. I want there to be absolutely no question that this isn't personal, it's professional. He's a liability to the company, and I have documentation to prove it. And? I smiled. And I want him to feel exactly how I felt in that supply closet. Just for a moment. I want him to know what it's like to be dismissed by someone he underestimated. Patricia raised her glass. Your father would be proud. He always said the best revenge was success, but I think he'd make an exception for competent vindication. The weeks crawled by like honey dripping uphill. Every day brought new humiliations, and every day I documented them with the detached precision of a scientist cataloging specimens. There was the morning Jason introduced me to a potential investor as just the help while I stood there holding a portfolio of market analysis I'd prepared. There was the afternoon he asked me to cancel my lunch break to proofread his presentation, the presentation based on my research, because you don't really need a full hour to eat a salad anyway. Do you, Maria? There was the spectacularly awful Monday when he blamed me in front of the entire executive team for a missed deadline on a project I'd never even been assigned to, simply because he'd forgotten to do it himself and needed someone to take the fall. Each time I smiled. I apologized when appropriate. I took notes. And I added another entry to the growing file that Patricia was assembling. But the breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October, during what was supposed to be a routine strategy meeting. I'd been working on a new client acquisition algorithm for months, my own time, my own computer, my own initiative. I'd mentioned it casually to Jason one morning when he'd asked what I was working on, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd show some genuine interest in an idea that could revolutionize how we identified and targeted potential customers. He'd nodded vaguely and told me to order more coffee pods for the break room. 2 weeks later, I walked into the executive conference room for the monthly all-hands meeting to find my algorithm, my code, my testing data, my results displayed on the projection screen under a title slide that read, Revolutionary Client Acquisition, a framework by Jason Winters. I felt my hands go cold. Then hot. Then numb. Jason stood at the head of the table, impossibly smug in his custom Tom Ford suit and his Rolex that cost more than most people's cars. I'm excited to share a breakthrough I've been developing, he announced to the assembled team of 30 people. This new algorithm will transform how we identify high-value potential clients. I watched my own work scroll across the screen. Lines of code I'd written at 2 in the morning. Testing protocols I'd refined over dozens of iterations. Statistical models I'd validated against 5 years of company data. How did you even? Started Jennifer Kim, our head of development, squinting at the screen. Jason, this is incredibly sophisticated machine learning. When did you have time to develop this level of programming? I've been teaching myself, Jason said smoothly. It's important to stay current with technology as a leader. Can't just delegate everything to the tech team, right? Jennifer looked skeptical but said nothing. Nobody ever said anything. Except this time, I did. That's my code. The room went silent. 30 heads swiveled toward me. Jason's expression flickered annoyance, then amusement. I'm sorry, Maria. Did you have a question about the presentation? That's my code, I repeated. My voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I wrote it. I tested it. I spent 4 months developing that algorithm. His laugh was theatrical, designed for the audience. Maria, you're an assistant. A very good assistant. But let's not get confused about roles here. I know you sometimes help with formatting and data entry, but actual software development. That's a bit above your skill level, don't you think? I have a computer science degree from Stanford, I said quietly. I graduated summa cum laude. And that algorithm has my digital signature embedded in the source code. The amusement drained from Jason's face, replaced by something uglier. This is inappropriate, Maria. Extremely inappropriate. We can discuss your apparent confusion about your contributions in my office after this meeting. For now, please take notes and let the adults talk about business strategy. Jennifer's mouth had fallen open. A few other people shifted uncomfortably, but nobody said anything. Nobody ever did. I stood up, closed my laptop with a decisive click, and walked out. Not to the supply closet this time. Straight to my desk, where I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. Move the timeline up, I said. I want the special board meeting scheduled for next week. And Patricia? Make sure everyone is there. Everyone. I could hear her smile through the phone. Finally ready. More than ready. The next 7 days were a blur of preparation. Patricia filed the paperwork for the emergency board meeting. I compiled my final documentation, every email, every stolen idea, every dismissive comment, every inappropriate remark. The file was 147 pages long. I also did something else. I called each board member personally, using the contact information from Dad's old files that I'd saved all these years. Mr. Morrison? This is Maria Chen, David Chen's daughter. I know this is unexpected, but I need to discuss something important about Vision Tech's leadership. Yes, I'll be at the board meeting next week. Actually, I called it. I appreciate your time. One by one, I planted seeds. I didn't reveal everything, just enough to ensure they'd show up curious and paying attention. The morning of the meeting, I wore my best suit, navy blue Armani, tailored to perfection, paired with the pearl earrings that had been Mom's. I'd worn jeans and casual blouses to the office for nearly a year, playing the part of the helpful assistant who didn't need to dress up because nobody looked at her anyway. Today, they were going to look. I arrived early and took my usual seat in the corner. Jason swept in 15 minutes late, as always, barely glancing in my direction as he claimed his spot at the head of the table. Let's make this quick, he announced to the assembled board members. I have a lunch meeting with the Berkshire investors at 1. Patricia, sitting in the guest chairs as my invited attorney, caught my eye and nodded slightly. Richard Morrison cleared his throat. Actually, Jason, this meeting was called by Maria Chen. Perhaps we should let her begin. Jason's head whipped toward me so fast I heard his neck crack. I'm sorry, what? I stood up, gathering the folders. I'd prepared one for each board member plus 3 extras. My hands weren't shaking. I'd imagined this moment so many times that it felt almost routine. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I said, my voice clear and calm. I've called this emergency board meeting to address serious concerns about company leadership and to exercise my rights as majority shareholder. The confusion on Jason's face would have been comical if the moment wasn't so important. Majority shareholder? Maria, what are you talking about? Did you hit your head? I walked to the head of the table, his spot, and set down my folders. He instinctively moved back, like a dog yielding to a more dominant animal. My name is Maria Chen, I said, making eye contact with each board member in turn. I'm the daughter of David Chen, who founded this company 23 years ago. When he passed away 9 years ago, I inherited 45% of Vision Tech, held in trust until my 28th birthday, which was 4 months ago. Since then, I've purchased an additional 30% from retiring shareholders. Patricia, could you distribute the documentation? Patricia stood and began handing out folders. The board members opened them with expressions ranging from shocked to fascinated. Jason just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You can't, he stammered. This is insane. Security. Somebody call security. I wouldn't, I said mildly. Unless you want them to escort you out immediately. Because Jason, I own 75% of this company. And I'm using that ownership to call for your immediate termination as CEO. Richard Morrison was flipping through the documentation, his eyes widening. My God. This is all legitimate. David's daughter. I remember you, Maria. You were just a teenager at the funeral. 19. I confirmed. I finished college, worked at Google for 2 years, and then decided I wanted to come back to my father's company. But I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to see what Vision Tech had become from the ground up. So I applied for an assistant position under my mother's maiden name, Rodriguez. You never connected Maria, Rodriguez, EA, with Maria Chen, shareholder. This is ridiculous, Jason said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You can't just. There are procedures. There are indeed procedures, I interrupted. Which is why Patricia has filed all the appropriate paperwork. My ownership stake is legal and documented. My right to call this meeting is absolute. And my motion to terminate your employment is now on the table for a vote. I opened my own folder and pulled out the thick stack of documentation I'd compiled. Before we vote, however, I think the board should be aware of exactly why this is necessary. Because this isn't personal, it's professional. Jason Winters has engaged in systematic intellectual property theft, harassment, and gross mismanagement. And I can prove every word. For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through it. Every stolen idea, every project he'd claimed as his own, every employee he'd blamed for his mistakes. The emails where he'd asked me to send him my work for reference and then presented it as his own. The recordings from meetings where he'd dismissed talented people because they made him feel threatened. The exit interviews with 3 brilliant engineers who'd quit because of his toxic leadership. And then I showed them the client acquisition algorithm, my code, with my digital signature embedded in lines he'd never even looked at closely enough to notice. This algorithm that Jason presented as his revolutionary breakthrough. I pulled up the source code on the projection screen. See this comment in the code? MC. Initial framework, October 2nd. MC. Maria Chen. And here's the version history from my personal GitHub repository, showing every commit, every iteration, going back 4 months. Jason presented this exactly 12 days ago, claiming he'd been developing it for weeks. Jennifer Kim stood up, her face flushed with anger. Jason, did you steal Maria's work? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in the 11 months I'd known him, Jason Winters had no words. The pattern is clear, I continued. Jason Winters is a competent manager of existing systems, but he hasn't had an original idea in the 3 years he's been CEO. He's been taking credit for other people's work, driving away talented employees and creating a toxic culture that's cost this company millions in turnover and lost innovation. I turned to face him directly. You told me I was just an assistant, that I should focus on what I was qualified to do. You called my work adorable. You made me feel small and worthless and invisible. And the whole time, I was the majority owner of this company, watching you destroy what my father built. The silence in the room was absolute. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and cold. The board is going to vote on your termination. If anyone votes to keep you, I'll use my majority stake to override them. You'll be escorted out today. Your personal belongings will be boxed and shipped to you. You'll receive the severance package outlined in your contract, which is generous, by the way, much more generous than you deserve, and a non-disclosure agreement that you will sign unless you want the full documentation of your misconduct made public. Jason finally found his voice. You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll do Stagrak. You'll do nothing, Patricia said crisply, speaking for the first time. Because every action Miss Chen has taken is completely legal, and any lawsuit you file will result in the immediate public release of this documentation, including the parts about the harassment settlements the company paid out on your behalf. The ones you think nobody knows about. His face went gray. All in favor of terminating Jason Winters as CEO? I asked. Every hand went up, including, after a long moment, Jason's own board ally, Marcus Blackwell, who'd been studying the documentation with an expression of disgusted fascination. Motion carries unanimously, Richard Morrison said. Jason, I'm sorry, but this is indefensible. Security will escort you out. And just like that, it was over. Jason stood on shaking legs, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Maria, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. And for just a moment, I let him see exactly how much I'd hated every second of the past 11 months. That was the point. Security arrived. I'd prepped them an hour earlier, just in case. As they led Jason toward the door, he turned back one more time. For what it's worth, he said quietly, that algorithm really is brilliant. I know, I replied. That's why I'm implementing it next quarter. Under its real name, the Chen Framework. After he was gone, Richard Morrison stood and extended his hand to me. Maria, I apologize. If we'd known who you were, if you'd known who I was, you'd have treated me differently, I interrupted. But you shouldn't have to know someone owns the company to treat them with basic respect. That's the problem. I looked around the table at the 8 board members, at Patricia with her satisfied smile, at the empty chair where Jason had sat. I'm not here to play games or prove points, I said. I'm here because my father built something incredible, and I watched it turn toxic under leadership that valued ego over innovation. That ends now. I'm appointing Jennifer Kim as interim CEO while we conduct a proper search for someone who actually deserves the role. And I'm implementing new policies about intellectual property, harassment, and workplace culture. What role will you take? Asked Margaret Stevens, the board member who'd been silent throughout. For now, I'll stay on as board chair. I'm still learning, still growing. But I'm also still going to show up and do the work, just like I've been doing. The only difference is now everyone knows who I am. I gathered my folders, suddenly exhausted. Thank you all for your time. Patricia will send the formal documentation by end of day. This meeting is adjourned. As people filed out, Jennifer Kim lingered. Maria, I just want to say, I'm sorry. I should have said something when he presented your algorithm. I knew the code was too sophisticated for him. You didn't want to rock the boat, I finished. I understand. But that's going to change. No more protecting bad leaders just because it's easier than calling them out. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Your father would be so proud of you. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally let myself feel it. Not triumph, exactly. Not even satisfaction, though there was some of that. More like relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for 11 months and could finally exhale. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Media's already calling. How do you want to handle it? I typed back. Standard statement. New leadership, commitment to innovation, moving forward. Nothing about Jason specifically. You're being too kind, she replied. Maybe I was. But I'd never wanted to destroy Jason, just stop him from destroying what mattered. There's a difference. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. There was work to do, real work, the kind that built things instead of tearing them down. I had a company to transform, a culture to heal, and about 100 ideas for innovations that had been gathering dust while I played the role of invisible assistant. My father used to say that success wasn't about proving you were better than someone else. It was about being better than you were yesterday. For 11 months, I'd been better every single day, smarter, stronger, more patient. I'd learned what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. And I'd learned that the people who underestimate you aren't seeing you clearly. They're seeing their own limitations reflected back. Jason thought I was just an assistant because that's all he could imagine. He couldn't see the Stanford degree or the years at Google or the brilliant algorithm because his worldview was too small to contain the possibility that the woman fetching his coffee might be the one who owned his entire career. That was his failure, not mine. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the father I still missed, to the woman I'd become in the supply closet between the printer paper and the toner cartridges. Here's to knowing your worth, I said aloud. Even when nobody else can see it. And then I got back to work.